Welcome to the Wide Right Podcast with Manny, Navarro, and some other guy.
Welcome back to the Wide Right Podcast. About to add Adam Lichtenstein from the South Florida Sun-Sentinel in here. He just joins me now. It is Thursday, August 14th, right around 5:30 p.m. And Adam, I know you were down there in Coral Gables today because Mario Cristobal and his coordinators had a press conference. We're about halfway through camp now, only, 17 days away from the season opener against Notre Dame. And so uh, we're starting to see this team sort of take shape in the sense of, okay, we're going to see a depth chart here. Practices are going to start becoming more about Notre Dame versus just having competition and so forth. And so it was good to hear from Mario today. Good to hear from the coordinators. I wanted to get your takeaways from these first couple of weeks at camp. How are you doing, first of all, before we dive into all that? How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's getting to be the dog days of August where it's a billion degrees outside and starting to be done with just being at camp, kind of getting, that itch for the season to start kind of over camp. I don't know if the players are feeling that way, but I know I am. I'm kind of like done with the practices. I'm ready for game week.
For sure, and I think I'm kind of at that point too with preseason stuff. I was in Nashville last week for the recruiting symposium and so many interesting conversations. I want to have an entire show just on that because of the interesting conversations with the way college football is evolving into basically the NFL. I mean, there were GMs there, agents there, people there to talk about just the way the pie is getting sliced now in this sport. I think it's a fascinating topic. So I hope to get to that soon. But for our readers and listeners, the people who read our stuff and listen to your stuff as well, I want to sort of get into just Miami and where things are right now with camp. And I thought, I listened to the interviews Mario and the coordinators gave today. I have some notes, some sort of takeaways, but I'll give you the floor first. What was your biggest takeaway just from today in terms of what those guys were talking about and where we are in camp?
I mean, nothing, super groundbreaking. They didn't come out and trash talk anybody or say like anyone's doing terribly, but they also, didn't say like they didn't name starters or anything like that or announce any guys were out for the year or anything like that. So just kind of your standard mid-camp update. But it seems like they're very high on this team. I think they're very confident in the players they have. I asked Mario kind of about, I think he mentioned during ACC Media Days that like, you tell the story of the 4 years he's been at so far, how far the program's come. And it just seems like, I think we talked about this last time I was on, like the floor of this program is so much higher than it was, when he got here. The talent level is so much higher. The competition level is so much higher. When you're talking about guys competing for positions, a lot of the time it's, former four-star guys who were four-star guys coming out of high school, or guys who were starters when they were before they transferred in and stuff like that. Like I feel like the program's come a long way, and I feel like this team is going to be, is like I said it last time, I think this team's going to be pretty good, and I think the coaches are pretty confident this team's going to be pretty good.
Yeah, I think when you compare them to everybody else in the ACC from a pure talent perspective, there's a couple of things you have to take note of. Number one, they're spending money just about as much as anybody in the ACC when it comes to uh, recruiting, when it comes to the transfer portal. They're obviously using the transfer portal a lot more than Clemson is. SMU is sort of on their level in terms of, I think, spending right now, and in terms of transfer portal type guys. I don't know if they're spending as much in recruiting as Miami is. So I think
SMU's got they've got that spending habit. They've
yeah.
had that going for a while now.
Yeah, for sure. But now it's legal, right?
Decades.
That's
Yeah.
there's no problem if somebody shows up in a Trans Am anymore
Yeah.
at an SMU practice like Eric Dickerson back in the '80s. But I look, I think it's absolutely time for Mario to win with this program, and so I agree from that perspective. I think listening to the comments today, my takeaways. Corey Heatherman talked about, and we could start with defense particularly, but Corey Heatherman talked about, communication. That's been the buzzword, right? All since he got there, right? We got to
Yeah.
sort of avoid those breakdowns. He said of the first scrimmage last week that they were playing a lot faster, which is, that's a good thing to hear from your defensive coordinator, that who's coming in with new language and new ideas for these guys, and really simplifying things that they're playing faster, which is what you want to see. You want to see less confusion out there. Um, I think my other takeaway, obviously, all eyes are on the receiver position. To hear that there's going to be more guys involved. We'll get to that topic, but let's start with defense and Corey Heatherman and what he said in terms of playing faster. What did you when you heard that? What did you? Oh wow, that's good. It's a good thing. Or what was your takeaway immediately when he said that?
I mean, it's like I'd hope so. I mean, like you said, like communication has been like the buzzword of like you said, since you got here in spring and now in the fall. It's about communication. It's about the guys have been talking about how much I guess simpler this defense is. So now that we're halfway through fall camp, I would hope that they're playing fast. That they've got the playbook down. They've got everything kind of sorted, and now it's about fine tuning. Going into week one and like you said, about 2 weeks. So I mean, like I said, I would hope they be in a good place there. But I did a story on like how they've been focusing on communication as kind of what that means and like where that communication is coming from, who's talking to who, and where it's kind of I think through Heatherman's defense, it goes a lot through the linebackers, and that's what Wesley Bissain said. I think in media day. It's about the linebackers communicating with the secondary and linebackers communicating with the first level defensive line. Uh, so I think the Saints is, a big part of that. Zachariah Poyser talked about how he's become a bigger communicator. And I think I would hope, like I said, I'd hope they'd have that, pretty much down by now.
Are we confident? And you do talk about the linebacker position. Are we confident at this point that your starters are going to be Basainth and Mohamed Torre?
Yeah, that seems like it's pretty well locked in, I think. I
Mhm.
mean, Basaint has got, it's crazy to think of him as a senior now. He's his first year at UM was my first on the beat, so it's like I'm getting old. He's getting older. So yeah, but I'm pretty sure he's locked in there, probably like outside linebacker. Motore, a guy who we talked about him before, where when he's healthy, he's really good, and he's played in Corey Heatherman's defense before, so I think they like him a lot. Kind of like I said, all stuff we've talked about in the past. But it seems like they're going to be pretty much locked in at starters. But I think they're going to do a lot of rotating guys like Popo Aguirre and Kamal Bonner and even Bobby Pruitt. Guys like that are going to get their share of playing time as well.
Yeah, and I think the secondary. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think if we were going to project starters at this point, your three corners are probably Ethan O'Connor, OJ Frederick, and Xavier Lucas, and your safeties are Zachariah Poyser and Jacoby Thomas. I think that it seems like that's a safe bet. Not that Charles Brantley won't play, not that Keontae Scott won't be in there on nickel situations, not that this is a pretty deep group and a talented group.
Yeah, I think like a lot of the defensive spots, they're basically all going to be rotating in and out. You didn't mention Damari Brown. I think he's going to get plenty
Yeah.
of playing time. I don't think they're going to be shortchanging many people. I think there's going to be a lot of rotation. It might depend on who they're up against and matchups and things like that. But yeah, I think that's pretty well, probably the starting week one depth chart, assuming there's no injuries in practice or anything.
Yeah. The one guy that was mentioned today that I've heard whispers about, but it was nice to see Corey Heatherman sort of acknowledged publicly was Dylan Day, who's the second year safety. He said he's been everywhere on the field, focusing on takeaways. He's obsessed with the football. He said, the entire defense has to be obsessed with the football, Corey Heatherman said, but it seems like Dylan Day especially might be one of those breakthrough guys in terms of second year taking a jump up.
Yeah, really annoying that he talked about him today because I wrote about him yesterday. So Corey Heatherman, maybe a good defensive coordinator, bad assignment editor. But yeah, no, Dylan Day, we've heard people talk about him all throughout camp. We saw him a little bit last year make some big plays on special teams, but and he mentioned this when he spoke to reporters, when Dylan Day spoke to reporters about a week ago, that just like the game was really fast for him last year. He spent a lot of time basically getting up to speed, more or less.
Yeah.
And now that he's there, it seems like he's like he's a ball hawk. A lot of positive reviews of him, both from Corey Heatherman today, his teammates, over the last couple weeks. I don't know if he's done enough, or I don't know if he's got the experience to maybe crack into that starting role like we were talking about. But I think again, you'll see him. He only had like 17 snaps on defense last year. He'll get way more than that this year.
Yeah, I think he's the number three safety. I think that's what I'm hearing when I hear these press conferences and so forth. Markeith Williams has obviously been at Miami for a long time, hasn't really played a lot, 285 snaps. But I think essentially what we're hearing from this coaching staff is that Dylan Day is pushing probably for that third safety spot behind Jacoby Thomas and Zechariah Poyser. Poyser's going to play
Heard,
a ton.
yeah. I've heard good things about Bryce Fitzgerald as well. He was the only member of the freshman class who didn't arrive in time for spring.
Right.
He, spent summer playing catch up, and basically I think a lot of the DBs have mentioned him as a guy who's frequently making plays. Heatherman talked about him a little bit today. Dylan Day talked about him. Had high praise for him like last week. I think he's a guy who might get on the field a little bit as well.
Yeah, and I think when we look at this defensive line, I obviously a lot of praise for Ruben Bain and the way he finally looks healthy. Ruben told us on media day he's lost a ton of weight, kind of back down to his high school senior freshman sort of playing weight, around 270 pounds, and so that's going to make him a quicker, faster edge rusher. Mesidor obviously is healthy; he's doing his thing. So I think you have your two established sort of top tier edge rushers. My question going into camp was defensive tackle, and I saw today there was some praise for David Blay and Ahmad Moten and Justin Scott. And what are you hearing on the defensive tackle position? Because to be honest, I'm no longer worried about the secondary. I think the secondary is going to be the strength of this team. I'm more worried about D tackle. I think that's the spot where I have the biggest question going into the season: is does Miami have a guy that can be a dude and really take the focus off the ends?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, like I said, it was basically all praise today. Not a ton of like, we have to work on X, Y, and Z. At least for the defensive tackles. So like Cristobal was praising, Justin Scott, David Blay, mentioned Dalen Russell, Micah Newton and Dante Simpson, those the two freshmen. So if you just take it at that and say, oh, we've got a group of six guys there, then great. But really, are they all going to be significant contributors this year? I don't know. I think the top group, the David Blay, Ahmad Moten, Justin Scott, I think that group is pretty good. Are they going to be a super? Is there a superstar in there, a guy who the equivalent of a Ruben Bain for the interior? I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. Maybe Justin Scott, being a former 5-star guy, can be that guy this year. We'll see. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they have a superstar on the interior though, but I think that three is good. Um, the question is, as you get more into the depth, the Artavius Joneses and Dalen Russells and that group of guys, can they step up as there's no drop off when Moten and Blay and Scott rotate in and out. So that I think that's a question for sure.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see and a great test right off the bat with that Notre Dame offensive line. Which, by the way, I know people look at Notre Dame and they're like, "Oh, they lost a bunch of dudes off a team that made it to the national championship squad." I covered that Notre Dame team in the Orange Bowl. They had 3 or 4 offensive linemen that were backups to begin the season who were starting for them in that game. And they just sort of just like Miami, they have a ridiculous rotation of talent that they just sort of stream in and out every single year on the offensive line. And so I think we're going to get an answer really quickly on opening night when, if Miami's able to contain Jeremiah Love, which, by the way, there may not be
Mhm.
anybody in the country who can do that. I think he's the best running back in college football. If they're able to contain him and keep him, from really blowing up, then I think we'll have that question answered opening night.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're definitely gonna need your run stoppers for week one with Jeremiah Love back there.
Important night for Justin Scott, I think, in my
Yeah.
in my eyes. Good opportunity to put some great tape out there. Let's move on to offense. Shannon Dawson. I always feel like we get more out of Shannon Dawson when he speaks. In fact, let's start with quarterback. The wide receiver is the big position, but I want to start with quarterback because he said something that caught my ear about Emory Williams. He said he's played really well and taken a lot of snaps, which to me is code for the backup quarterback. Wrong or right? What do you think?
No, that sounds right. I mean, then I think we all assume most likely he'd be the number two, behind Beck, just because he's got, Luke Nickel is obviously a freshman. Judd Anderson, I think, has one career college snap. Emory Williams has played. Uh, he's not always played amazingly, but he's played. So I think it was pretty well assured he'd be the number two guy. He got all the, basically all the number one reps during spring when Carson Beck was hurt. So I think, they're not like, pushing Emery out the door or anything. Like, he's going to be the number 2 this year. And they still like him and all that, so yeah, no, I think he's pretty entrenched for that number 2 spot.
Yeah, I think coming out of the spring, the way Luke Nickel played, I think there were a lot of people who thought, well, maybe there's a chance he could challenge Emery, right? Because he's a talented guy. He's has ability. Emery, looked terrible in the bowl game, but Emery came back really focused, lost a bunch of weight, focused on his throwing motion, worked with a private QB coach over the summer, and seems highly, highly motivated. And that's pretty much what I gathered from Dawson, that he is really trying to compete for that backup job. And God forbid something happens to Carson Beck, maybe Miami has a better QB situation than they thought.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, he does have to compete for that number 2 spot because one, you have, Luke Nickel coming in, 4-star recruit, who has looked a lot better in the fall, I think, than he did in the spring. And the guy who's, one of the guys who's really stood out to me in the fall has been Judd Anderson. I feel like he's put a lot of work in. I feel like he's got a lot more maybe command of his ability, I guess would be the best way to put it. Just from
Hmm.
in the parts of practice that we've been able to watch.
Right.
He's made some throws that have really impressed me. I think he's come a long way from maybe this time last year. I asked actually Dawson about him today, and he agreed basically that, like, yeah, he looks a lot better. He's improved a lot. Basically over the course of the last year.
Yeah, he was a project get from the get go. You knew that you were going to have to work on him for a couple of years, and Dawson has done that before in places that he's been previously. He's had a guy who are sort of pet projects that he turned into quality starting quarterbacks, and so we'll see what happens with Judd Anderson and what happens with the quarterback competition in 2026. But for right now, 2025, it's all about Carson Beck, and I think everything I've heard coming out of camp is this is a guy who's doing it the right way. I know there were people questioning why did he leave Georgia. Georgia's a better situation. They win national championships there in recent history, not ancient history like Miami. So there was a lot of criticism. Maybe Miami's getting damaged goods, not only from a elbow perspective, but maybe a leadership and all the other intangibles. But again, Shannon Dawson highly complimentary of Beck, calls him a perfectionist. He says he's probably harder on himself than anything, and that he's got a different process. He snaps out of it quickly, plays the next play, but that he's hard on himself and knows the offense really well.
Yeah, no, I mean, everything we've heard about Carson Beck from everyone has been extremely complimentary, extremely, a lot of praise from the players, from the coaches. Like, I mean, and everything that we've seen from him. I did some radio interviews over the last week, and obviously the first question I get asked is, how does Carson Beck look? How's his elbow look? And I'm like, look, I don't have a radar gun on him, but looks good to me. I'm not clocking his throws, but they look like good throws. They look like,
Does
the ball's coming out easy.
doesn't look like Tate Martell's floaters. You weren't
Well,
around for Tate
yeah, I
Martell,
wasn't there for
but
that, but
it was
yeah,
pretty
no, I mean,
ugly.
yeah, but I'm like, yeah, if I didn't know he had elbow surgery, I wouldn't have guessed he had elbow surgery. He looks healthy.
Right.
He looks good. Like, I mean, everyone, Cristobal said he's a full go, and Beck said he's fully healthy. So, I mean, I mean, no one said anything. No one said a bad word about him since he's got here. So,
Right.
I have nothing bad to say about him either.
I'm going to say this. Shannon Dawson talked about this a little bit today. The offense is going to look different than it did with Cam Ward. We know that. It's a different set of wide receivers. It's a different set of people. And we'll get to the wide receivers in a second. But um, I think from a play calling perspective, I thought this was interesting in terms of how Shannon said he studies, what different NFL teams use, and there's new stuff with Beck that's going to be used. There is new, sort of the same way they did with Cam Ward, where and I wrote about this last year, was they kind of went to the Washington State tape and took things from Washington State that he did well and said, okay, go run that here. I think the cool thing about Shannon Dawson is he does the same thing essentially with Carson. There's things that he knows Carson likes and is good at, and he adapts the offense to what he likes.
Yeah. I mean, Cam Ward is a one of a kind quarterback. He's a special dude. Obviously Heisman finalist, number 1 pick, and a guy who can, dart around in the backfield and make ridiculous throws. And I don't know if Carson Beck is that guy, but I think what you're going to get in Carson Beck is going to be, it's going to be still be pretty good, just in a different way. And you look at what he did with Georgia, especially in his first year as a starter. He can be a, top 3, top 5 quarterback in the nation, which is what he was in 2023. So yeah, I mean, Dawson's a very skilled offensive coordinator who, like you said, has kind of tailored the offense to who he has, to the personnel he has, and I think he's going to do that again this year.
The one interesting element, though, that may be different than anything we've seen from Shannon Dawson here in recent years is what he talked about today, which to me, my biggest takeaway was what he said in terms of there's a lot of competition in the receiver room, a lot of hardworking guys. We have a lot more people rotating in. What I think you can look forward to is a lot more guys playing in games. It's a very low drama group, which was sounded interesting to me because it almost insinuates maybe there was too much drama last year or in previous years or other situations. What that says to me is that, this could potentially be a room where you see 6, 7 guys getting a bunch of targets versus the way Shannon Dawson offenses have looked the last few years. And I looked this up because I heard the comment. I said, let me do my homework and provide you guys with some answers. Last year, there were 5 Miami receivers that had more than 40 targets. Restrepo leading the way with 95. Arroyo was 5th. Elijah Arroyo was 5th with 47. In 2023, there were only 3 Miami receivers that had more than 40 targets. Restrepo with 119. Colby Young, the next third with 63. 2022 at Houston, 4 receivers with more than 40 targets. And 2021, 4 receivers with more than 40 targets. I think it's kind of interesting, right? When you think about Shannon Dawson saying potentially, you could have 6, 7 guys here catching passes and being targeted in the offense. It is different. I wonder how that's going to look.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this, last time I was on. Like, they've got, I think, a group of probably 7 or 8 guys who could be good receivers in this group. The question is how many of them, go from could be good to are actually good.
Right.
Whether it's the transfers or it's the returning, younger guys like Ray Joseph and JoJo Trader and Nye Carr, or the freshmen like Josh Moore and Malachi Tony. It's a question of who steps up. I could very easily see them starting the year with like CJ Daniels and Keelan Marion and JoJo Trader being like their top 3. And then by the end of the year, maybe CJ Daniels getting a little bit less time, or Keelan Marion getting a little bit less time, and Malachi Tony and Josh Moore getting more time.
Yeah.
Because I'm very high on those freshmen. Uh, so I could definitely see them rotating guys in and out frequently. One, to keep guys fresh, and two, because there's a lot of talent in that room, and it's about who converts that talent into actual production. So I mean, it kind of doesn't surprise me, and I think that's probably a good way to go about it. The unfortunate thing is that you come out of the gate against Notre Dame, and then you have Florida in week 4, so you don't have the runway to find out who those guys are. Have to throw them right into the mix against a high level secondary. You
Yeah.
can't figure out who those guys are going to be against a Akron or something. Um, they're going to find out relatively soon. Uh, but I think you work that big group and you whittle it down, I guess, to who your premier guys are, and then if those guys um, need a breather, then okay, great, you throw in the other guy who can also produce. And then if you have that kind of big group and that kind of flexibility, then the more the merrier.
Yeah. I think that the question for me is, does a Shannon Dawson offense have to have a true number 1 guy? And if you look at history, last year was as close as it got to really being spread out with 5 different guys being targeted a bunch. Because if you go back to his Houston days, when he had Tank Dell was targeted 152 times in 2022 and 139 times in 2021. I mean, that's a lot, but maybe this team is talented enough to handle it. I guess we'll find
Yeah,
out.
yeah. So if you got a Tank Dell, you want to take advantage of that. But if you've got 4 or 5 guys, and then wouldn't even talk, I didn't even mention Elijah Lofton and Alex Bauman, who
Right.
I think we'll probably see a lot of this year. Bauman was solid, especially in the red zone, I think, last year for Tulane, and Lofton I'm very intrigued by. I think everyone's very intrigued by. So those are 2 more guys who you can target in the passing game. Like, I could definitely see 5, 6 guys getting significant amounts of targets this year.
David Lake asked a good question because the slot receiver position in this Shannon Dawson offense requires some level of experience and expertise. You have to be really good at finding space in the defense. You don't always run the route that's necessarily drawn up. And Xavier Restrepo was special in this offense because he knew how to find space. Everybody's talking about Malachi Tony and how he's going to have an opportunity to play right away and be a contributor. And, Mario Cristobal's calling him baby Jesus. Today, Shannon Dawson said, look, the guy has an advanced ability to get open. It's pretty rare. He understands football. He understands spacing, very calm, has a skill set that fits that position. I'm going to put you on the spot right now, Adam. We're going to do this right now. Who is going to lead the Miami Hurricanes in catches and yards this season?
Who's going to lead them in catches and yards? I think catches will be CJ Daniels. I think yards, if he stays healthy, JoJo Trader.
Okay. Those are good. Those are good. Those are good
I,
estimates.
I think the slot guys, I think they're going to use Malachi Tony, they're going to use Tony Johnson, I think they're going to use Ray Joseph, and they're going to cannibalize each other's numbers.
I think there's a very good chance that whoever's in the slot is going to lead the team in receiving, because that's what we've seen the last 2 years. And it's not that Miami doesn't have guys on the outside. I just think the way this offense is drawn up with tight ends, with slot receivers, that Carson Beck might be more comfortable throwing to them than, launching it down the sideline. JoJo Trader will get his opportunities. Josh Moore will get his opportunities. I'm sure CJ Daniels will get his opportunities. But maybe Malachi Tony is the guy. Maybe he's the guy who is sort of your, I think a KC Concepcion at NC State a couple years ago, right? Where he sort of, I don't want to say came out of nowhere, because certainly Malachi Tony is a blue chip recruit, but I don't know. I think there's a chance that he could lead the team in receiving. So it wouldn't totally surprise me. Let's move on to running back real quick, and then we'll get to the mailbag, because both of us have places to be. He talked a little bit today about Marty Brown, the transfer from North Dakota State. Said he doesn't talk a whole bunch, but he's very coachable, and he's built in a way that's very hard to tackle. Jordan Lyle, meanwhile, good grasp of protections. His instinct and ability with the ball in his hands are what they are. He has a good ability to make people miss. He can make something out of nothing. Mark Fletcher, finally healthy, finally sort of going to be that number one guy. But is there a chance that Marty Brown passes up Jordan Lyle, or do you think this is a 1, 2, 3 pecking order in the running back field?
I don't think he'll pass up Jordan Lyle, but that's not a slight against Marty Brown. I think Jordan Lyle's very good.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're all going to get their share of carries. I think they're gonna use Marty Brown. I think they're gonna use him a lot. I think especially as we get into second halves of games, and Mark Fletcher, the big dude that he is, pounds away at opposing defenders, and Lyle is shifty and stuff. And then okay, great, here comes you go to the bullpen. Here comes Marty Brown, who's fresh. For the third and fourth quarter to run 10 times and put up 65 yards and 2 touchdowns or something. I think he's going to be an integral part of this offense. They didn't bring him in just to be depth. I think, he's going to be a big part. And I liked one about his personality. I think Shannon Dawson said, I don't think that dude ever has a bad day. Just said he's a very, affable kind of guy. And yeah, like he said, low center of gravity kind of guy. I think he said you have to get low to take him down. So I'm very intrigued to see what he can do. And I'm very intrigued to see what he can do in a bullpen role, kind of, because he ran the ball a ton for North Dakota State last year. He ran the ball like 250 times. So what is he able to do when he's only running the ball, 75 in the Jordan Lyle role, 70, 50 to 70 times this year?
Right.
Maybe a little bit fresher. Do we see that yards per carry, go up a little bit? Is he a little more explosive in that, more limited role? Like he's definitely a very intriguing option. And I think, they didn't, like I said, they didn't just bring him in to be depth. I think he's going to be a big part of the offense.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the fact that he is sort of respected in the way he is tells me that the coaching staff plans to utilize him quite a bit. And maybe he's that fourth quarter back, right? When the other two guys sort of are done pummeling you through the first 3 quarters, and he just comes in and rips off some nice long runs, or used around the goal line, etc. But we'll see how things shape up there. Let's move on to the mailbag. I know I didn't address the offensive line, and that's probably going to get Shannon Dawson upset with me.
Well,
but
what's there to say? They're good. They're really good. What's there to say?
We know that already, right? Let's get to the mailbag questions, because we have a couple here that I thought were intriguing. Adam, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
This is from Brandon BC Mantilla on Twitter. He says, I know the staff likes to keep things hush on this, but are there any key injuries that might have a significant impact on the game plan or the team's chances week 1. I don't know if he's a Notre Dame fan. Maybe he is.
Well, part of what we're not supposed to talk about injuries as
Hmm.
part of attending practice. And even if we were, they've not made practice open to the media for a week and change, give or take.
Right.
So I couldn't even tell you if guys were there or not because I haven't been there. So TBD,
Yeah.
we'll
Yeah.
see. We'll see. I mean, like I think people get banged up in camp. Uh, and unless I haven't heard
They
of any
always do,
meaning,
Adam. They
yeah,
always
yeah,
do.
yeah. People get banged up. I haven't heard of any severe injuries that like long-term injuries. I think when it's what we're like you said, like 17 days out, and if it's 10 days from now and it's the Monday of the Notre Dame week, and people are still hurt, then it's more urgent, I guess. But yeah, right now, as far as I know, nobody's like out for week 1. As far as I know, that could be wrong. I don't know.
Right. Well, I mean, there's so many rumors that always come out, right?
Yeah,
People always on the message boards this time of year and trying to figure things out. I'm with you. I have not heard of any season-ending injuries. I think there's potentially some guys that could miss week 1, but it always
I'm
happens.
day to day.
Yeah.
I'm day to day with a
There's
foot injury.
there's always people with foot injuries and things that happen. Vic Vassell, Coach Vic 4 says, "Will Miami have a 1,000-yard rusher and a 1,000-yard receiver? They managed to do that last year, did they not?"
They did. They did indeed.
Yeah, I think they
Uh,
will as well. I think, in my opinion, I think there will be a 1,000-yard rusher, and I think there will also be a 1,000-yard receiver because somebody will emerge. I think it's inevitable. Somebody will emerge as a guy.
I agree with you at receiver. I think they'll be a 1,000 yard receiver. I don't know if they'll be a 1,000 yard rusher only because they have so much depth in the running back room. So unless somebody gets hurt, I think they're going to divvy things up pretty well. Where Fletcher, Lyle, Brown, and even maybe a little bit of even Chris Wheatley, Humphrey, and Gerard Pringle will get in there a little bit maybe, and maybe divide it up a little bit too much. I think the running game will be good, but I don't know if any one guy will get 1,000 yards. I
This
could see Mark
question,
Fletcher running for 900 or something.
yeah, I mean, there's a chance. I think they're going to run the football more, but I still think they'll hit both benchmarks. Before Miami moved to the ACC, was there an opportunity to go to a different conference? No, no, there was not.
Miami to the whack.
Yeah, look. There was always conversations with the SEC, right? In terms of, oh, please take us. Miami wanted in the SEC back in the day, and I know this because I looked this up years ago. You go back to the 40s, 50s, and 60s when the SEC was sort of coming into its own. I think it was known as the Southern Conference at one point before it became the Southeastern.
I
And
think
I
that was
think,
like the third, up until like the 30s. I think that.
yeah, Miami tried, but Florida basically blocked the door. Florida didn't want anybody and didn't want anybody else in the state of Florida getting in the conference. And so the Gators are responsible for that. And I think ultimately Miami was just never viewed as a fit for the SEC from a home stadium atmosphere. You're not one of us, dude. Is the way Miami was always sort of treated by the SEC,
And
and
that's why I say no one who went to the University of Florida can ever be trusted.
it's a good point, Mister Florida. All right, this is from Ricardo Gomez. What's going on with John Ruiz? Is he still involved with Miami? I've not seen John Ruiz in a minute. Have you?
Nope. No, I would say you might know a little better than me, but no, I haven't seen or heard from him really at all. No, I know his family. I think still has a box at Mark Light Field, or Mark Light Stadium. So that's about
Yeah,
it.
yeah, I agree. Um, what else do we have here? Is there any last question? People asking about getting the podcast back on Apple again. So our department at the Athletic in the podcast department basically got trimmed quite a bit, and so we have just national podcasts now. We don't really have team podcasts. So all of my podcasts, in terms of wide right, would be here for YouTube. That's basically it. So I'm sorry for the podcast people who were used to having it easy to download, but the Athletic has the rights to the podcast in terms of uploading it. They were the ones that handled all that. I created my own YouTube page to sort of continue this and to give you a visual on this stuff, and so that's it.
Now
That's
you
where
can
we are.
see our smiling faces.
Yeah, here's something from Tony Perez. The question is, any idea how Mario is thought of by other ACC coaches. I'm glad you brought this up, Tony. My colleague at The Athletic, Chris Vanini, ranked the coaches in college football. He has a coaching tiers story up on the website. And it's basically split, I think, into 8 tiers, if I'm not mistaken, or 6 tiers. I forget. Let me look at the bottom here. It's 8 tiers. 8 being hottest seats and freshest faces. 7 works in progress. 6 show me seasons ahead. 5 up and down. Rising stars and steady hands is tier 4. Tier 3 is high level consistency. Tier 2 is established winners, and tier 1 is multi-time champs. The only people in tier 1 are Kirby Smart and Dabo Sweeney. Where do you think Mario Cristobal falls in your mind?
I actually know the answer because I read the article earlier. I know where he is, and I think it's pretty fitting. Do
Yes,
you want to do the honors of revealing where he is?
I will reveal. He is in tier 3 under high level consistency. I'm going to mention some of the other coaches that are included here. Brett Bielema from Illinois, Jeff Brom from Louisville, Troy Calhoun from Air Force, Matt Campbell, Iowa State, Jamie Chadwell, Liberty, Spencer Danielson from Boise State, Eli Drinkwitz, Sonny Dykes, Kirk Ferentz from Iowa are all in tier 3. Tier 2, if you want to play the comparison game, this is everybody in tier 2. Kurt Signetti from Indiana, based on his success, obviously at Liberty and then going on to Indiana. Ryan Day, who just won a national championship. Kalen DeBoer from Alabama, obviously had success with Washington. James Franklin, Marcus Shreeman, Brian Kelly, Dan Lanning, Lance Leipold. I think Lance Leipold's a little too overrated. Lincoln Riley, Steve Sarkisian, and Kyle Whittingham. My only criticisms, I probably bump Whittingham, Riley, and Leopold into 3. And, I know Dan Lanning won the Big Ten last year, but I don't know. Is he really an established winner? It's debatable. What are your thoughts on where, is Cristobal, do those guys have to sort of drop down to Cristobal's level? And what do you think it'll take for Cristobal to move up into tier 2?
I mean, what I think tier 3 is about right for him. I think he is consistent. I mean, he hasn't won anything at Miami yet, but he did at Oregon. He won the Rose Bowl, won the Pac-12. So he's got stuff, in his history and on his resume. And he has built, Miami to a much improved level, like we talked about earlier. Miami when he got here was, maybe not quite a dumpster fire, but was not in a good spot. Um, and he's built it to now, I think, where they win 10 games last year. I think they're going to be, spoiler alert for our football preview. I bit the bullet and said 11-1 for my prediction. I think they're going to be very good this year. I think he is a good program builder. Uh, to get to that next level, he has to win now. He has to take, like you said earlier, he has to take that next step. He has to, be competing, get to the ACC title game, get to the playoff now that it's a 12-team playoff, like get to that next level. I think if he does that, say they go 11-1 and, maybe they lose to Clemson in the ACC title game and make the playoffs anyway, then I think, I think he could be bumped up to that second tier if they accomplish what I think they should accomplish this year.
I agree. I think he's got to win the ACC before we can consider throwing him in tier 2. And let's face it.
I think this year I'm very high on Clemson. I think if I had to make a national title pick right now, it might be Clemson. But so I think if you go like 11-1, lose to Clemson, make the playoffs, and who knows what happens there. I think that's enough. But yeah, you got to be competing. You got to be competing for the ACC. You got to be in the title game. You got to be competitive with Clemson and be top 2 program in the conference.
Yeah, I agree. And Tony, to answer your question, how he's thought of by other ACC coaches, I think he's thought of by other ACC coaches a lot the way most people do, which is he's a very good recruiter. He works hard at what he does. He's not necessarily the greatest game day coach, but everybody has their strengths and weaknesses, and so I think he's respected. I think when he finally wins the ACC here, which is inevitable, I think it's going to happen here before he's done. I think he'll be looked at a little differently. And if he gets Miami to the playoffs this year, whether that's in an ACC title or not, I think people are going to start to maybe change their tune about him because he will have won the ACC and the Pac-12 as a coach, which I don't know how many people have done that before.
Yeah, there's definitely like a national don't know if stigma is the right word, but I like, listening to a lot of the nationally focused like preview stuff, and it's, like, oh yeah, he's built the program to a good spot, but is he going to cost them a game with something, in the fourth quarter? Going back to things he did at Oregon and the Georgia Tech game 2 years ago, the Syracuse game last year, and until he wins, like that kind of stigma is going to be there.
Yeah, and that Georgia Tech loss, unfortunately for Mario, is it's hard to get over that until you win, right?
It's
It's
a
just
bad one.
hard to survive that. Um, it's from Alex Avila. Manny, with your national connections, what's your take on the Notre Dame QB battle situation? Yes, Notre Dame has not named a quarterback yet. CJ Carr is getting some level of competition for that job. I think CJ Carr is going to be Notre Dame starter. Neither of the quarterbacks have played. Yes, the guy he's competing against has been there a year longer. But all I've ever heard about CJ Carr is that when he gets to Notre Dame and he's finally able to play, he's going to be the guy. And so, Pete Sampson, who covers Notre Dame for us, has been tracking that. You want to read more about it, you can go to the Athletic and check it out. But I think CJ Carr will be the starter opening night. And this is the time of year a lot of coaches, first of all, they don't want quarterbacks to get in the transfer portal and leave. Notre Dame already had that happen. Steve Angeli left for Syracuse. You want Kenny Minchie to stick around as much as possible to push CJ Carr, but I think in the end, I think it will be CJ Carr. All right, Adam, last question. How many excuses will we hear from the national media when we start 4-0? That's from CE Bauer, Kane Biz 3 on Twitter. What is if Miami starts 4-0, first of all, do you think there's a national hate for Miami?
I think Canes fans probably overrate it.
Um,
I think. I mean, look, if they start 4-0, if they're a top five team. I think they're going to be they'll be a trendy pick, because people are high on Florida, and obviously people are high on Notre Dame. Those are two. Florida I think is 15 in the AP poll. Notre Dame is 6. So you beat those two teams, and obviously you beat USF and Bethune, probably handily. The hype train will have no brakes. I think they'll be if that happens. Say they beat Notre Dame by 3 and they beat Florida by 7 or 10 or something like that. Like, people will be jumping on the Hurricanes bandwagon. They'll be a trendy pick. They'll be a top 5 team in the country. And especially if Carson Beck looks good. Carson Beck, for better and for worse, is a national name. People know him around the country. If he has a good, 4-game stretch where he, say he throws for 300 yards against Notre Dame and 350 against Florida and doesn't look like he's seeing ghosts or anything. Like, people are gonna be all over the Hurricanes. It won't be. I don't think it'll be a hate fest. I think it'll be a love fest. And until they potentially blow game in the ACC or something. But and then it'll be same old Miami. But yeah, no, if they're 4-0, I mean, I don't. I think the hate for Miami is overrated. It's been 25 years since Miami has been a hateable team. Uh, so I think it's kind of overrated. But I don't think there'll be excuses if they're 4-0 and having beaten a Notre Dame and having beaten a quality SEC team. I don't think anyone will be making excuses for them. I think people will be falling over themselves to praise Miami.
I think it all depends on where Florida is because Florida will be coming off of a game against LSU the week before, coming down here from Gainesville to face the Canes. So I think if DJ Lagway isn't healthy and they beat the crap out of a wounded Gators team, then I think people are not going to give them credit. But I think if Florida comes in here 3-0, having beaten LSU, and the ACC is sort of flexing its muscles, don't forget Clemson plays LSU to open the season. And if the ACC looks good, then I think ESPN is going to jump on their second favorite conference, the ACC, because
Well,
God
I
knows
would
the baby is the SEC.
I would agree if they only played Florida in the non-conference. I'd agree with you. But if they're 4-0, they'll have also beaten Notre Dame,
Right.
who there'll be no. I mean, there should be no excuse for Notre Dame. There's no. Whether Carr wins the battle or Kenny Minchie wins it or whoever.
Oh, there'll
That's
always be excuses for Notre Dame, Adam. Come on. They
well,
just
yeah,
played the national championship game and lost everybody, supposedly,
yeah,
right? I
but
mean, that's
well,
the
yeah.
story.
I'm just saying, like, if they had 3 games against nobodies and then played Florida, minus DJ Lagway or something, and were 4-0 that way, then I would probably agree. People would be like, well, yeah, they beat Florida, but Florida's missing Lagway, whatever. But if they beat Florida and they beat Notre Dame, which shouldn't have any, like I said, shouldn't have any excuses, then I think that would temper even a wounded Florida, a win over a wounded Florida.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see. Adam, thank you for coming on and doing another episode. I know you got a high school game to get to. I have a soccer practice to drive to, two soccer practices to drive to now. So make sure you follow Adam's work at the Sun-Sentinel. He's writing every day on the Canes. I wrote one Cane story last week, or this week actually. I wrote it last week and they finally ran it this week. So that you can check those things out online. Make sure you follow Adam on Twitter as well. Thanks for tuning into the Wide Right Podcast. Thanks for coming on again, Adam.
Thanks for having me.
Take care, guys. See you next week.